the main thing is so the way I look at it, like just how much in an uproar the left and that community is about this. And it's that quote that I mentioned at the beginning that it's that
Mhm.
you're used to being able to push your views in everybody else's face and nobody can say anything about it because let's be real, LGBT is a religion at this point. You know, it may not have a deity, but that's not the requirement for a religion. I think there's a shared belief system, and if you were to try to look at it, like let's say you had a marketing team that was
Mhm.
all gay people, and I wanted to hire that marketing team
Mhm.
and say being gay is a sin, you're going to hell, like just have all this basically gay bashing stuff. Should that marketing team be forced to provide those creative services?
I mean, I'm against forcing anybody to do things that they don't want to do. But at the end of the day, I think this is another one where they're um, like they've left a lot on the table here. And I mean, you kind of did it when you're like, well, LGBTQIA plus is a religion at this point. I go, well, you can't discriminate on basis of religion,
For sure.
but you can based on sexual orientation, which I think is weird. So, like,
That
I can't refuse to do business with Christians because they're Christian, and I think that their views are wrong.
yes.
I
So
can't do that, but I can because of who they choose to sleep with at the end of the day. I think
that's
that's
not
a real weird thing.
that's not at all what the Supreme Court is saying.
Well, hey, what's going on, Jeff? So it's been a couple weeks. I hope you had a good 4th of July, but I think we're gonna jump back into it. We've got 2 full weeks of news to get through, so hopefully this will be a good one. First off, you have to explain your background to me because I'm a little lost. So, like, what's
Yeah,
going
no,
on here?
you're good. So no, it's that's for those who don't recognize Thomas Sowell, Common Sense, great author, great book, but it's the quote that kind of tying into these Supreme Court decisions that people that get used to preferential treatment, it starts to feel like discrimination when it's equal treatment. So if we talk about that, I think that applies to two of those three big Supreme Court decisions: the affirmative action and the LGBT. With the Colorado, the website designer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess we'll start with the affirmative action case. I mean, do you have any takes on that? Are you more or less pleased with the decision, or uh,
I definitely think it's to say pleased with the decision. I don't know. I think it's more of a return to less racism, less race based decisions in America. Because the thing is, you can still, as an applicant to a college,
Mhm.
you can still say this is how race affected my life. This is how my life was different. These are hardships that I had based on my race, where I felt like I was treated differently. But it's not just a default decision just because you're based on the color of your skin, you get certain treatment.
So my problem with the decision isn't the decision itself. It's more of what it left on the table. It's This did nothing for legacy admissions. It did not, like, if we're going to pretend that like colleges are merit based, which is what we've been doing. Um, I mean, why would you allow somebody who went to the school before to get preferential treatment for their children to get into the same school? So like if we're going to operate under the auspices of, we're completely enrolling students on merit, and then why aren't legacy admissions also disallowed?
But see, I don't look at it like that. Like I don't see it as these schools are only based on merit. It's just you don't get in because of the color of your skin. So I wasn't looking at this as this full sweeping, this is gonna
Mhm.
level the playing field completely for everybody. It's more just taking away that one advantage. And again, if you had hardships, if you felt like you were treated poorly, you have that admissions essay to be able to put all that stuff in there and include it.
And the thing is
It's
I don't disagree with that, but I also looking at, then what's the point of like FAFSA? Like, if your main complaint is that, oh, well, you shouldn't get in just because you had a harder life than somebody else, like, that's what FAFSA is. That's saying that, oh, well, my parents didn't have a lot of money, so therefore I need a government grant to go to school. Like, it doesn't tackle any of that. All it's saying is, well, we're just going to take race out of the emissions things, which I don't agree, or I don't disagree with on paper, right? I don't disagree with that on paper. The problem is that it's been shown time and time again. You're going to end up with all white schools, all Asian schools, and all black schools. Like that, it's just the way this is going to pan out. So I think that this addresses a problem that wasn't really a problem. And I mean, we'll see how it plays out. Like history is going to be our guide. Like, but I really think that this decision is going to have a lot of consequences um, that just don't we don't see currently.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's kind of an over extrapolation to say that it's going to turn into all white schools, all Asian schools, all black schools. I mean, we already have certain schools that are like black only. Colin, it's not exclusively black, but I think it's like Brown University. You've got a handful of these schools that only admit certain students or heavily favor certain races. And I've always wondered how is that even legal? How is that not a violation of the Constitution when we're saying that you can't discriminate on the basis of sex or race or immutable characteristics?
I mean, I more or less agree with you on that fact. It's interesting when you start taking race into effect because you can only go so far without it continuing to be racist. Like, I mean, we can pretend that we don't make decisions based on race in this country, but we absolutely do. So I'm not sure that the Supreme Court took everything into account. But for the most part, I don't disagree with this ruling. I think that we're going to have to see. I don't think it's this catastrophic thing that you hear a bunch of leftists talking about, but I do think that they do have a point where it's like, well, you got rid of one problem, but you left the other problems in place. I think legacy admissions need to be looked at. If if the Supreme Court stance is that things should be merit based, then let's make it merit based all the way around.
So that's where I would kind of start to disagree is
Mhm.
going to be that legacy admissions it's still always going to be about money. So the
Right.
people that are going to be most likely to be donors are going to be people that went to that school, and the people that are going to be even more likely to be donors are going to be people that went to that school and their kids were able to go to that school. So if we're trying to get away from the federal government funding schools, funding colleges, and allowing it to be, it's not everybody has to go to college, then I think we need to have this reliance on private funding.
Mm. I mean, the problem with private funding is that when you start treating education as a business, it, you're assuming that outcomes are going to be the same, right? You're assuming once somebody gets a degree, they're going to go and get a decent job. But as we've seen time and time again, that's not played out. I mean, there's a whole joke. What do you do with a degree in psychology? Well, you end up working at Subway. Like it's the same like deal, and yet these guys are stuck with thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt in some cases, and with no ability to really pay that off. So I, I think relying on private funding for things like this is kind of a double-edged sword. Like you're going to end up in this scenario where private funds are going to pour in, interest rates are going to get insanely high because they're going to need to make money off the people that can actually pay versus the people that don't. I think you're asking for uh, I think you're asking for a collapse of our current financial system if that's the case.
Hmm.
You're gonna saddle people with a ton of debt that they can't discharge via bankruptcy.
So that's actually tying into
Mhm,
like maybe we skip the LGBT stuff just but
mhm,
in terms of like the loan forgiveness decision um that I really think students should be able to declare bankruptcy. I know allowing that if we just said okay anybody that has student loan debt can declare bankruptcy just go for it that would result in a collapse. I agree that there is a student debt crisis
mhm,
but the thing is so people with degrees still make on average, I think it's about $22,000 a year more in that age range. Like I was just looking into this, it was age 22 to 27. You make about $52,000 a year,
mhm.
which I thought was funny because that's what I was making at AT&T selling cell phones was about 50 to 55,000.
Right.
And then people in that age range that are high school diploma only, they'll make around 30,000. So you still have that college degree does still mean something. It means something on applications, even if you have that psychology degree and you're applying for a subway manager job. The person with the degree, it shows that you persevered through something, that you completed it, even if it's in some like anthropology or something that has no application to that job. it still shows that you tried and you
I
succeeded.
I mean, so the thing is like, yes, the numbers do bear out that way, but I think our takeaways are going to be different here. My takeaway from that is that the cost of a degree in this country has skyrocketed, and the jobs that you can get going out, yeah, you're going to make more than somebody with a high school diploma, sure, but it's not enough to justify the amount that you had to pay to get that degree. What the bet is hopefully at some point it will, but as we're finding out, it's a lower and lower percentage of cases that that actually bears out. And I think if you were to make it to where students could actually declare bankruptcy, um, it would fix a lot of things for the individuals, but it would make banks, especially private banks, a little more iffy on whether or not they're going to issue a student loan. So it's this weird scenario that we've ended up in, which I do think the federal government needs to address. I think they need to be involved in it in some way, because you have to somehow assuage the banking system that, hey, you're going to make money off this, so you need to issue loans. And at the same time, you need to have a mechanism in place for those people that end up with crazy amounts of debt to somehow get out from underneath it.
So
Um,
so I was actually looking into this, and apparently you can declare, you can discharge your student loans in bankruptcy. It's just a completely separate petition that you have to file, and it's much more difficult. And I
yeah,
believe the reason why is because it's federally guaranteed. It's the government not getting their money back, not the bank itself.
right. The likelihood of that happening is actually really low. If you look at the statistics on it, it's like less than 10% of people that actually file actually get their stuff discharged.
For sure,
It's
but if you look at the requirements, you got to be able to prove undue hardship. And as
Mhm.
I'm looking into it, that's the bigger question: is what does undue hardship actually mean? Because
Right.
when Congress passed that, they didn't provide a definition, so judges have just kind of had to figure it out for themselves.
Right, and it's the judge's discretion, right? And I mean, again, if you were in charge and somebody's like, "Hey, I'm only making like $30,000 a year here, and I got saddled with a whole bunch of debt. I need out from under it." They go, "Well, if we reset up your payment structure, that's more likely the outcome." Which is not the same as a discharge, right? It's you're still going to pay this. We're just going to extend the length of your loan, more or less. Which I think in some cases that's fair, but I would say that coupled with a reduction would probably go better for the consumer. Um, I
So
don't know. It's a hard one, and it's another one where I didn't disagree with the Supreme Court's ruling at face value. The thing that I do disagree with is the what do you call it? I'm gonna get stuck on this word. Um, what is it? It's the precedent it sets. Um, it's so the executive branch can create a department completely out of thin air, run it, but then the Supreme Court saying, "Well, you just can't you can't dictate how it runs. I can create it out of thin air through executive order, but then I also don't get to dictate how it runs. That's supposedly left to Congress somehow." Like if you go look at the whole program, it was not set up the way that you think it would be. It's not one of those things that gets reaffirmed through Congress. The budget is, but not the actual program itself.
well,
And
let's just back up there a little bit. So why should the president just have unilateral
oh,
authority like that?
I think I think they shouldn't, but the Supreme Court has ruled time and time again that they do have the ability to set up these programs, like the whole what do you call it? The whole border situation, the Dreamer kids, right? Like that whole thing is a government program set up by the executive branch. And what this ruling does is say, well, the executive branch can set up a system, but it can't dictate how it runs. And I think that's a very dangerous thing.
That sounds like an ideal thing, that you
Why?
don't have one person just setting up programs and deciding how it runs. That's the entire way that our government is founded, with checks and balances. You've
Okay.
got the Supreme Court able to come in and do exactly what they've been doing, just
So if I'm
regulating.
if I'm a bad actor that's been elected president, I can just willy nilly set up these programs and then turn to Congress and be like, well, you got to fund these things now. Like that's not
Well,
really a power of the purse thing. Like you like
so is and maybe this is just my ignorance, but
Mhm.
wouldn't Congress have the ability to shut that down then?
I mean, technically, but let's just say I want to expand food stamps. If I wanted to expand food stamps, right, I could expand food stamps for a year without Congress intervening whatsoever. I could sink this country millions of dollars more into debt, probably billions, and Congress would be like, well, we're going to shut down this program, but they're still stuck with the bill at the end of the day. I think that's just bad policy all the way around. So I think the Supreme Court really needs to address executive orders and be like, look, this is what the president can do and what they can't. Because the way it sits right now is that if I were president, I could set up an entire government program, have it run for a year. Congress decides they want to shut it down, and then Congress still has to pay the bill for it. Like, I think this is a really weird gray area when it comes to executive action.
Yeah, you don't have to convince me on the executive orders. I think
Right.
the last two presidents have both broken the records, like by a wide margin, broken the
Right.
records for the number of executive orders that they passed. Probably last three presidents.
I mean, it's because we've kind of, I think ever since the 90s, we've kind of just given carte blanche to executive power. Like, pretty much we said the president is more or less a king and can do whatever they want. And anytime Congress tries to hold them in check, it always ends up in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, to this point, up until this moment, has kind of gone along with executive power. So it's interesting to see that finally the Supreme Court's trying to do something about it. But I think that what they've done here is left this really strange loophole to where, oh, I can create something. I can't dictate how it runs. Congress has to do that, and they have to pay for it. That's just, it's terrible. Like, the
I, w-
Supreme Court has made a quagmire here.
I wouldn't say terrible because I mean, yeah, there is a loophole, but
Mhm.
it so number one, the Supreme Court doesn't legislate. So they're just going to set some guidelines.
Oh, come on now. They legislate. We know they do.
Okay, so we're gonna just agree to disagree on that.
Okay.
But it's Congress. So the Supreme Court comes out and sets those guidelines, and then it's up to Congress to be able to go create that legislation, and convince the president to sign it. So if it's a loophole, like I don't think that's a problem. I think that's going to come down to what Congress does. I think it's going to be up to Congress to close those loopholes and come up with as wide sweeping, as complete legislation as possible. That's not the Supreme Court's job to me to try to close all those loopholes. It's their job to point them out.
I mean, you could make that argument, but I would say that the Supreme Court needs to be careful with their rulings and the ripple effects of them. And I think right now what we have is a Supreme Court that is like, we're just going to take a look at the issues one by one. You can't do that without seeing the ripple effects and being like, well, if we do this, this is how it works down the chain, right? Um, I mean, you can say that's a Supreme Court legislating, but I honestly think that's just a Supreme Court making fair rulings.
Mm,
I
fair
mean,
enough.
you have to look at, like, if you institute a policy, you have to see how that policy is going to affect everything else in the chain. That's how businesses work, right? So I would expect my Supreme Court to do the same thing.
Yes and no, but
Mhm.
like the Supreme Court isn't there to implement the policies. It's more there to shape the policies,
Mhm.
to trim away the fat, to trim away the things that are being exploited.
Well,
And it
the if you go look at, like, the Supreme Court's mandate, originally it was just to keep the two powers in check, right? You've got the executive and the legislative to keep them from stepping on each other's toes. And I think with this ruling, they haven't really done that. So,
so there's the disagreement is
Mhm.
that I don't think the Supreme Court exists solely to provide the checks and balances. I think all three bodies are there to check and balance each other. I look at the Supreme Court as more being there to uphold the Constitution, to say this is the spirit of the law, and this is what the way it should be interpreted.
But the thing is like, we when you look at the Supreme Court, you're looking at it at a very narrow view. You're like, oh, well, everything should be beholden to the Constitution or Constitution. That's true. But the thing is it's not just the Constitution. It's all the body of law that has come before it. It's it. like all those giant manuals that are I don't know how many miles long now. Like somebody did the calculation. That is what they're supposed to be ruling on, not just the founding document. It's
It's both. It's
right.
how those miles long documents fit in with the Constitution, that
Mhm.
those can be wrong, and if the Constitution's wrong, there's a set way to change that, and you gotta have a
Right.
convention of states, you gotta have everybody, not everybody, but you gotta have at least, what is it, like, 2/3 of state
Right.
agreement.
You're talking about the amendment process.
Exactly. So if something violates the Constitution, if there's laws that get passed just because there's miles of text, there's however many judges that are allowing these changes,
Mhm.
there's no way for someone to be able to regulate and say, okay, every single law follows the Constitution, doesn't violate any of the amendments. So that's what we have the Supreme Court coming in and being able to, here's the important ones that
Well,
will
that's what
take
I'm
these escalations.
Well, that's what I'm saying is like the first thing they look at is constitutionality, right? Is this constitutional or not? But then it's how does it also fit into our existing laws? Like how does it fit into our existing rule set, more or less? I mean, you could make the argument that they should only be worried about constitutionality, which a lot of people have, but since at least the 50s and 60s, they've always ruled that, well, is it constitutional? Yes, no. Okay. If it's constitutional, how does it fit into the rest of our existing like legal structure? Does it make sense? Right. Because it law has to be congruent in order to be effective. Like you can't have these crazy loopholes like the one that I just said and have an effective law, right? Like so you've constrained executive power here but not over here, right? Which leads to this weird chain of events. So eventually, the Supreme Court's going to have to address it. But I think me and you are more or less in agreement that I think it was the right ruling at the end of the day because
Yeah,
I do want to see more constraints on executive power.
yeah, but again, it's not the Supreme Court's duty to write those laws. It's them just to say, no, you're not allowed to do this.
I mean, we'll agree to disagree because a lot of times in their arguments and stuff like that, they've thrown out entire like sets of law over it, which is beyond like the scope of that individual case. So I mean, if we're gonna take precedent as guide, they could have thrown out all of it at once, been like, no, executive power is specifically these things, and if it falls outside of these, it's unconstitutional. They could have done that, and they just didn't.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right,
Before we move on from Supreme Court, I'd be
right,
remiss if we didn't get into that LGBT
right.
case. Just because the main thing is so the way I look at it, like just how much in an uproar the left and that community is about this, and it's that quote that I mentioned at the beginning, that it's that
Mhm,
you're used to being able to push your views in everybody else's face, and nobody can say anything about it because let's be real, LGBT is a religion at this point. It may not have a deity, but that's not the requirement for a religion. I think there's a shared belief system, and if you were to try to look at it, like let's say you had a marketing team that was
mhm,
all gay people, and I wanted to hire that marketing team
mhm.
and say being gay is a sin, you're going to hell, like just have all this basically gay bashing stuff. Should that marketing team be forced to provide those creative services?
I mean, I'm against forcing anybody to do things that they don't want to do, but at the end of the day, I think this is another one where they're um, like they've left a lot on the table here. And I mean, you kind of did it when you're like, well, LGBTQIA plus is a religion at this point. I go, well, you can't discriminate on basis of religion,
For sure.
but you can based on sexual orientation, which I think is weird. So like
That
I can't refuse to do business with Christians because they're Christian. And I think that their views are wrong.
yes.
I can't do that, but I can because of who they choose to sleep with at the end of the day. I think
that's
that's
not
a real weird thing.
That's not at all what the Supreme Court is saying. I can't remember what justice wrote this, but it basically hinges on the message that's being requested and not
Mhm.
who's making the request.
Okay.
So if it's somebody that, just because I'm a straight person asking for this marketing team to do something, if that's why they're denying it, then yeah, that would be against this ruling. But
However they want to justify it, I think they've made a mistake here. And the reason is because okay, so let's say tomorrow I come out and I say, well, I'm going to found the LGBTQIA plus religion, and have everybody in those communities join it, right? Well, now you can't discriminate on basis of religion. You can't say who to hire, who you can hire, who you can fire. You can't say who you can and can't do business with because of it.
Uh,
So I think you've actually made the case that they probably should form a religion at this point, because
uh,
religions are more protected than they are.
Again, it's not
Mhm.
about the people that are making the request. It's not
Mhm.
about how you identify. It's not about even race or any of those immutable characteristics. It's about what's being requested. And I
Okay.
think there's a difference between if you're an accountant or some just objective role and a non-creative role.
Okay.
I think that's different than saying, "Hey, I need you to use your artistic expression," which I would argue that a creating a website is artistic expression,
Okay.
that you shouldn't be forced to create things for somebody that violates your closely held beliefs.
Okay. Then I would say that anybody who is of the LGBTQIA plus persuasion should stop catering to Christians. It goes against their beliefs.
If
It
it's a
should
creative
compl yeah, if it's a creative thing, don't make them websites, like, and the thing is, like, most of the gay people that I know are the most creative people on the face of the freaking planet. So if you want your websites to suck, stop hiring them.
uh, uh, so I would say that that's actually kind of a bigot mentality to say that
Mhm.
because somebody's gay, they possess creative abilities, or
Oh,
it's
no,
because
I'm not
somebody's straight,
saying that. I'm
they
just saying
don't possess creative abilities.
my personal experience is they are the most creative people on the face of the planet. So I'm just gonna say out there, stop doing business with Christians and see how far it gets you.
So this is again like you're trying to tell the entire community that you should do so just because you have a certain quality or a certain characteristic, you must now abide by the rest of the rules. You're not allowed to consider yourself the LGBTQIA plus community if you would take money from a Christian person to go make a website
I didn't say
about
that at all. I was just saying I think that they should stop.
mm,
I think that they honestly should stop and then have that make its way to the Supreme Court.
you want to start talking about here's the extrapolations, here's where this is going to lead. That's
Because
basically where you're leading it to.
it's not about the messaging, and I would love to watch any of the Supreme Court justices try to reconcile that with the ruling that they would have to make in that case. Because it's like, well, on one hand, you're saying it's not the person, it's the messaging. I'm like, okay, well, I think a Christian couple who wants to put a cross on their wedding cake or a cross on their website, I refuse to do business with. Justify that ruling to me.
No, I'm
Because
100% okay
because
with that.
technically under the law, you can't discriminate based on religion.
I would be
So
100. I think that would fall 100% in that ruling that if you are
mhm,
a gay baker and
mhm,
somebody says, "I want you to make a Christian themed cake," that, no, here's
and
as far as I'll go with the cake, and
mhm,
here's what you can do with the cake afterwards.
right.
Like,
Well,
that sounds
or just
totally
not
fair.
at all. Just no.
That sounds totally
Right.
fair. But
Sounds
it
sounds fair to me, but
but
I
it
wanna see that one end up in the Supreme Court and watch them struggle to justify their previous ruling.
I
Because
I
at some point, you would have to be like, "Well, so this one person wants their beliefs expressed, and this other person also wants their beliefs expressed. So either both of them can or neither of them can." That's the deal. Like,
No, it's this person wants somebody else to express their beliefs. It's not, "I just want my beliefs expressed." I want this person to do that, and they are obligated to do it
hold on.
because
I
they
I
I'm paying them.
okay.
So it's that like, going back to that accounting. So, like, let's say I'm an
Well,
accountant and a gay person comes in. How do you even know that they're gay? How do you even know that they're Christian? Like, that
right.
shouldn't even
So,
come up in
so
conversation.
like, the guy that was mentioned in the case, like the guy that supposedly requested the cake, he's not even gay. That's the whole thing to this story is
I
they
I
actually
think
track this dude down. He's not even gay.
I think you're conflating the cake with the website. 'Cause
I
that's
might
what
be.
the website, my understanding was it was a hoax, was
Mhm.
that it was something about, like, that was kinda funny to me that it made it to the Supreme Court off of
Right.
some hoax.
Right.
The cake was definitely you had 2 gay dudes that were getting married,
Mhm.
and that was, like, an official on the level story, and they shopped
Okay.
around to, like, 3 different bakeries, and it wasn't until they found the baker that said, like, "Here's how much I'll do for the cake, but if you want 2 dudes on there, like, you gotta do it
Right.
yourself."
You're gonna have to put that
And
on yourself, right?
that's where it made it, like, so that was the real one, but
Mhm.
either way, it's still if somebody just says, "Hey, I want you to make me a happy birthday cake," like,
I
that
don't agree with that message, so no.
If you are a Jehovah's Witness and it is a closely held belief and you don't celebrate birthdays,
Oh no, it is a
I think
very
that would be
closely
a
held belief of mine that anybody who
yeah,
requests a happy birthday cake does not get one.
done. So if you want to
Okay.
turn away business, you're because of all like
I'm just saying.
especially in the cake business, if you're going to deny people happy birthday cakes, like you'll be out of business in a week's time.
Right. So that's the thing is like, oh, so you have this business who's decided, well, because of my beliefs, I don't want to put uh, a website together, even though most wedding websites are not really that freaking creative. They're all the same 10 templates over and over and over again. I know this because I'm getting married soon. So it's one of those things where it's like, well, you could make the argument this is artistic expression. Sure, I'll buy that. But at the end of the day, you're refusing based on your religious beliefs.
And
Okay. So, but your deeply held religious beliefs. So, okay, I think LGBTQIA plus should found a religion and be protected under the same law.
okay, but if you are in that space of like we're going to be denying this, the you as the left should be cheering this and saying, okay, like you're just going to be hurting your business. You're not going to be making any money because the LGBTQIA plus community and all of the allies, we're not going to shop at your store anymore.
Okay.
So
And I think you should be
that
able
should
to
be the
choose that.
response.
Well, that's the thing is like I as the consumer have the ability to decide where I want to spend my money, right? But here's the thing is now you've extended it to, well, providers can now say, well, you are a gay couple and you're asking me to put two men on a wedding cake. So no. Okay. Well, so you're okay with them turning away that business because you don't think it's that big of a market, right? I would argue that it's a big market and it's getting bigger. And I think you're missing out on profit. And the moment that that market gets big enough, watch how they change their tune.
That's fine. That's up to
Okay.
that business.
Okay.
That's between that business and their customer base. I don't think that's something that should be legislated.
Okay. But I will say now on this show, that if you are a part of that community, start refusing business to Christians who demand crosses, things like that, and just see how far it goes. Because I
And,
would love to see that end up at the Supreme Court. I really would.
and if the people that you're talking to right now, if you or they're like all willing to forgo that profit,
Mhm.
like no, this is a closely held enough belief that me taking money for this is not worth it.
Mhm.
That's a free market
Okay.
economy, baby.
Okay. We'll see if the Supreme Court agrees with you. I think we're in agreement on they both should fall under the law. I would just love to see it in practice. And I would
Yeah,
love to see the Supreme Court justify it in practice.
I don't think
Because
we would see it anytime soon.
no, you're looking at least a year out. But I mean, I think you could forego that profit for a year.
I was thinking probably 5 years out, just because they
Supreme
already.
Court's been taking those cases pretty quickly lately, so
And that's why I think we just had the cake one, and then we just had the website one. I feel like this is pretty settled, at
okay.
least for the foreseeable future.
I just want to see if Supreme Court will take it up because you would really have to get into the meat of the matter here, and the meat of the matter is at what point do your religious beliefs infringe on my ability to exist? Because if Kroger came out tomorrow and said we're no longer catering to that community, would that be okay?
No, because that goes back to what I was saying. It's about the message that's being requested, not about the requester. So if
Okay,
Kroger comes out saying we're not going to be putting LGBT branding or we're not going to be putting Christian branding, we're just going to have it
okay,
the basic I think blue and white backgrounds, like
okay.
anybody that wants to buy it, you're more than welcome to. That sounds
No, no more
totally reasonable.
crosses on anything.
That sounds
Sounds perfectly fine to you.
it if you're trying to pass a law saying no more crosses on anything, like no, obviously
No,
not.
I'm just saying, like, I think then we should put pressure on these businesses to be like, fine, if you cater to this community, then we won't do business here. No more crosses. Zero.
That if that's what you as a business want to promote, then good luck Bud Light, good luck Target.
Okay. I mean, as far as I know, Bud Light's still around, still generating fairly good revenue.
Mm, I don't know about that. Like I sent you
Mhm.
those links where Target, I think it was Target actually that was selling Bud Light, and it was like $12 for the 18 pack or whatever it was, and you got a
Yeah,
$15 rebate.
the
Like,
thing is you're looking at, like, the Bud Light apology tour, and just give it time. Their numbers will be just fine.
you say that.
I do.
Yeah.
I've seen this quite a bit in my lifetime, and their numbers will be just fine. Corporations bounce back always.
Yeah, I don't think Anheuser-Busch is going anywhere, but I think Bud Light as a
Definitely
brand
not.
is I think Bud Light as a brand is ruined. Like, it would have to
Mm,
go through a rebranding at this point.
well, we'll see. I know Bud Light was the beer of choice for beer pong tables everywhere, so we shall see.
For sure. So that's what, like, I've been watching like UFC a lot lately, and like
Right.
I'm at a point where they just ramped up like a bunch of the marketing, and
Mhm.
like Bud Light super huge in the sponsorship, like this the center of the octagon mat, like you got this big Bud Light logo, and
Right.
one of the announcers, Mike Goldberg, he keeps saying, like recently, he's saying Bud Light, the perfect beer for whatever happens. And
Right.
like that's such an LGBT like message. I was thinking like, yeah, whatever
Right.
happens, Bud Light's the perfect beer. Like,
Well, Well, all right. I think we've pretty much voiced our disagreement on this topic. What else you got for me?
yeah, I was hoping for a smoother transition from all this into the Biden crime family. Like, I thought
Oof.
the loan forgiveness, because the thing is, so like the loan forgiveness, like that was a promise that Biden had made during his campaign for 2020.
Mhm.
So on a certain level, like I do respect Biden for trying to at least fulfill his campaign promises, not just hey, I'm going to say a bunch of stuff that you want to hear, and then once I get into office, do whatever. And it was kind of the same thing for Trump with the build that wall. Like, yeah, I agree or disagree. Like, I do
Well,
have some base level respect for trying to fulfill your campaign promises.
I mean, that's fair, but at the same time, I think that Biden went into it knowing that he probably didn't have the power to do this. Like I think that was a campaign promise that Democrats made that they know that they couldn't fulfill without control of both the House and the Senate. And lo and behold, they lost control of the House. So, and if it was really a priority for it, they would have done it when they had full control, right? It's the same thing with Trump's wall. Like if it was really Republicans' priority to get that done, they would have gotten it done. Um, I don't know. I think it shows that corporate interest in America trump individual interest, because if you poll the majority of Americans today, they would be in favor of some form of reduction of that debt, if not full forgiveness, because it has gotten way out of hand. And it's a federal program that more or less your tax dollars have already been spent. You're just hoping to get some of it back. You're probably never going to get it back anyway. You might as well just write it off.
It's not
And,
it
and I think it's corporate interests that has stepped in to make sure it didn't happen.
it's not just about hoping that, I get a little tax break here or a tax break there. Another big part of it is you made an agreement. This is something that you need to adhere to. And
Yeah.
swinging this away from the Supreme Court decision and back into the Biden corruption,
Right.
it's Biden just got told by the Supreme Court, hey, you're not allowed to do this. And Biden that same afternoon was saying, well, they said I couldn't do it this way. So I'm
Right.
going to try to go it like I couldn't do it under the COVID Act. So I'm going to go try to twist this other act
Right.
into making it legal, the Higher Education Act, to making it legal for me to do
But
here.
that's the thing. The Democrats viewed the ruling as more a procedural thing than an actual Supreme Court thing. And if you actually read the judgment here, I mean, they were given every indication that, oh well, if you'd have just done it this other way, we might have ruled differently. So why wouldn't Democrats go down that rabbit hole? I,
Maybe so. The Democrats were already playing it like, and I don't want to say the Democrats is in like all Democrats are in
Mhm.
one group. Like my problem is specifically the Biden crime family and just how corrupt he is.
The thing is you keep saying the Biden crime family, and I'm like, well, I mean, you got Hunter, but you've got that with everybody on the other side. Like, if the big thing against Hunter is that he used his dad's name to make money, then why aren't Ivanka and Jared Kushner also getting the same treatment? They got $2 billion from the Saudis, and no one seems to be batting an eye at that. $2 billion, and this is after Donald Trump had left office. You think they're not using his name to make money? Come on, man. Like,
So my gut response is open the investigation. Like
okay,
if we want to look into it, instead of saying, well,
It,
these guys did it too, so don't look into the like my gut says, well, let's look into both.
okay.
And when you talk about the difference, I don't know enough about why the Trumps were getting money from the Saudis. I don't know the Trumps as being in the oil business, but I do know Hunter Biden is somewhat in the oil business with Burisma. I know Hunter Biden was doing deals with Ukraine. I know Joe Biden was bragging about how he got the Ukrainian, whatever their equivalent of the attorney general is in Ukraine. Joe Biden got that guy fired because that guy was starting to look into to Hunter's dealings in Ukraine.
But have you heard the position on the other side where it was like, well, this dude was corrupt anyway, and he was already taking bribes. So why wouldn't you want to get rid of a prosecutor that was doing that? Does it benefit you to do so? Absolutely. But that dude wasn't clean either. So, I mean, it's justifiable. Like you could
Okay,
literally justify it.
that it's fine that he was corrupt and he needed to go, but Joe Biden bragging about getting rid of him explicitly because he was looking into Hunter Biden, like that doesn't
But
make you look super
that's the
clean
thing is you're
either.
making a jump there. If you listen to the tape, he doesn't mention Hunter at all. He brags about getting
Mm,
rid of a corrupt prosecutor. Oh wow. like
mm,
like you're making the leap that it's because of Hunter Biden. There's no proof of that anywhere. It
mm.
is a logical leap to go from one to the other.
So it's not quite a logical leap. That's what this, and if you want to call him corrupt, that's what this lawyer attorney that's what he said
Mhm.
for why he didn't why he got fired is because he was looking into Hunter Biden.
And then I'm going to go with the Trump defense. That guy is obviously upset that he was fired. Like
Th-
if we're gonna play games with this, then let's play.
That
You got to play
that's
it
fine.
equally on both sides.
That's totally fine. But to say that this goes from being 100% corrupt, 100% bad on Hunter Biden to 0%, I
I
don't
don't
think that's fair either. I would
know.
say,
Do I think Hunter Biden is a bad dude? Yes. Do I think that has anything to do with Joe Biden? I think you haven't proved a thing. I think you
okay,
haven't proved that Joe was involved in any of it.
okay. So what about the messages where you had the 10
Oh,
held? So there was
hold
a
on.
Chinese.
I'm sitting next to my father. We're waiting on this.
Not that
Uh,
one yet. Not
okay.
not that one. If you want to go into that, that's one that I'll bring up because that was
Mhm.
another that I think that was 2017. So waited for Joe
Right.
Biden to get out of office,
Hmm.
and then okay, now that our finances aren't being scrutinized as closely, let's go ahead and bring in some of that money. And then if you're the Chinese or whatever Chinese businessman saying like, well, what's Joe Biden going to be able to do for us now that he's out of office? Like, maybe I just don't pay. And that's what you got Hunter Biden sending this message, my ability to forever hold a grudge. And I don't think it's up for dispute that that money was owed. So
Hmm.
what was that money owed for? What favors did Hunter Biden do?
That's the thing is we don't know. Does Hunter Biden have business dealings in China? Yes. So are we just gonna pretend that like you're again making a leap from Hunter to Joe that I think you just don't have proof of. And the thing
Okay,
is
so
you could make the case that, oh well, I think they covered their tracks well, which they might have, but that's the problem is you have to prove it.
here's the thing. Why can't you prove it? And let me answer that for you. So you've
Mhm.
got that David Weiss special investigator that you've got two whistleblowers from the IRS that are
Mhm.
saying that he was barred from interviewing people that he wanted to interview for this, and he was barred from getting search warrants. And one
Okay.
of those people that he wanted to interview was Tony Bobolinsky,
Okay.
and that was the Hunter Biden's business partner. That's the
Mhm.
guy that was CC'd on the exact same email that said, like 10 for where is it? 10 held by H for the big guy.
Okay.
And Tony's out there saying the big guy was Joe Biden, H was Hunter, and the 10 is 10%. 10% of this deal that's on paper is being held by Hunter Biden for Joe Biden. So that guy was blocked from being. So when you say, oh, you don't have the proof, well, you can't set the standard and say you're not allowed to collect the proof and then also berate people saying that Joe Biden's involved. Well, you don't have the proof.
Who's in charge of the investigation?
So that's the question. That's what
It's
needs to
it's
be.
it is not the Biden administration, is it?
So that's the question. That's what the whistleblowers are coming out saying is that David Weiss, the special investigator who's supposed to be in charge of the
Mhm.
investigation, is his hands are being tied behind his back by Merrick Garland. And you think Merrick Garland's doing that out of the kindness of his heart, or you think Joe Biden has some hand in that?
I mean, again, you're making a bunch of leaps there to be like, well, do you think Joe, like, if you have Joe Biden on a call saying, hey, I need you to do this for me, then yeah, you got him. But here's the thing is you're never going to get that. Like you're never going to get that. So it's not about what you can say. It's not about what you think. It's always about what you can prove, right? That's why Donald Trump hasn't been indicted more than he has. It's about proof, right? It's about what can you prove?
So the level of proof required to go after Trump is very different than the level of proof to go after Biden. That was
We
another
have
problem.
him. We have him with the boxes. We have him on tape holding up. And like the thing is you can say that the level of proof is different. It is really not. You have
S-
him on tape. You've got him telling people to move the boxes around specifically to avoid them being noticed, seen, anything like that, to avoid the investigation, the people looking for them. Like
So
we've
another
got
th-
him. Like I
uh,
don't let's
another thing that these whistleblowers were bringing up was it's not just being blocked from interviewing people or the subpoenas, the search warrants. Another thing is just these unexpected delays, which I kind of give them credit for, just because it is the president's son. The allegations are that there's ties to the president himself, that he was abusing his power. So let's take our time with this. Like, let's make sure we're extra sure versus just what you would see with a random person.
right.
But you don't see that same treatment being given to Trump. It's let's move forward as quickly as possible. We need to get this done before the 2024 election. We need to get this to hurt his numbers specifically. So again, when I say that there's a different level of proof or evidence needed to prosecute one guy versus the other, that's the type of stuff that I'm talking about.
Well, that's the thing is it's not a difference of proof then. You're worried about the motive. And I'm like, yeah, like the Democrats definitely do have a motive to try to get Trump disqualified before the 2024 election. Like they do. But Republicans also have a motive to smear the sitting president as much as possible before the 2024 election. So I don't think there's a difference here. I think both camps are playing the same card.
Kind of,
It's
but
just one has a lot more evidence than the other. Like,
But both camps have the same motivations or similar motivations, but only one camp is able to effectively control the FBI. Only one camp is able to effectively control the Department of Justice.
okay, so on the during the 2020 election, right? Did Donald Trump have the entirety of the FBI and the Department of Justice under his control?
I would say no. Technically, he was the president, and they should
Okay.
have been following him.
Okay,
But
so if you're going to give the benefit of the doubt to Donald Trump to not have full control over those two departments, why the hell would you then be like, well, Joe Biden has full control?
and
Come
I,
on,
I
man.
wouldn't I wouldn't say full control, but what I'm looking at is the results.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily who's in charge, who's the name up there. It's what is the FBI actually doing? Who are they going after? And what level of charges are they bringing against these people? And when I see Trump and Biden being similarly corrupt, and only one of them is really getting the hammer thrown at him, and the president's son, who had a bunch of you had all of these felony charges that were being recommended by just the IRS. Forget about the gun charge. Forget about the prostitution. Forget about everything else. He gets off with basically a slap on the wrist. And then you've got a former president who's looking at jail time.
I mean, one was offered a plea deal and the other one wasn't. I mean, Donald
Exactly.
Trump
And
has already said that even if he was offered one, he wouldn't plea. So why offer him one? Like,
mm,
we could play this all the way around, but here's the other thing: is one cooperated with the investigation, the other one is openly and defiantly not cooperating.
for sure,
So,
and you'll find no argument from me that Trump is shooting himself in the foot, that Trump's
right.
big mouth is basically what's getting him into this situation.
I mean, so much so that the judge who has ruled favorably for the Trump team in the past has pretty much said, like, look, you have to stop doing this. Like you can't keep going in here and like insulting me and insulting the lawyers for the other side. Like before we're even in court, you can't do this.
All
Um,
that's gonna do is make Trump wanna do it even more,
I
though.
I know that, and the thing is like you got Trump digging his own grave over the whole deal. Now, do I think Trump is going to serve any sort of jail time? No, I don't, because I think money in this country allows you certain favors. But I do think that any normal person facing the charges that he has and the evidence that we have, it's open and shut, and I don't think it would take months to prove it.
Sorry, I tuned out there for a second. Were you talking about Trump or Hunter Biden? About
Oh,
all the evidence that you have against him and what
okay.
level of charges you
So let's focus in on Hunter, right? If we go against if we go on Hunter, it's about what you can prove, right? We've already discussed the laptop because there's no chain of custody. It's not admissible. It's just not. Any reasonable judge would be like, there's no chain of custody on this. I'm throwing it out. So if you throw out the hard drive, what do you actually have?
So what you have is again Tony Bobulinski. So
Okay.
that's fine if you want to throw out the evidence, the laptop itself as evidence, but there's things that were found on that laptop that have corroborating stories, corroborating witnesses.
But you
You,
can't
you
use any
can
of it
why not?
because it there's no chain of custody on the hard drive itself. Chain of custody
Okay,
is everything.
but if that's just the lead to be able to take you down a certain path, I don't think you would say throw out all evidence that resulted from this chain of custody that you can independently
You the thing
prove
is
that
is
this is legit.
the thing is you have to. Like the way the law is set up in this country, you have to. That will never be admitted in any courtroom in the United States as it currently is. So when you have Republicans going up there and saying, "Well, I have like everything that's on this laptop," none of that's admissible. So what we've got here is we've got something that you can't use, and then you've got Hunter Biden who's being prosecuted for federal crimes such as tax evasion and gun charge. Now, those are the only things they could charge at the federal level, as far as we know, because those are the only things he pled to. So you've had a federal investigation that got him on two things. Two, all these other charges would actually be state and local level charges that would have to be filed against Hunter. So when you say, "Oh, well, I have evidence for this," cool. None of that could be charged at the federal level. The states in which those crimes occurred in file charges, but until
So,
you do, you got nothing.
so that was another one that one of the whistleblowers was saying was David Weiss was trying to file some charges in California for,
Mhm.
I think it was some tax deal. Like I think both of these guys are IRS whistleblowers, so everything that they're going to be talking about is going to be related to just unpaid taxes.
Right. It's going to be
But
federal tax evasion, is what they're
you
talking about.
you had well more or less, but you had
Mhm.
Hunter Biden that was out there paying prostitutes as part of his payroll for his businesses, and he was paying them for prostitution.
Okay.
And the David Weiss wanted to bring those charges in California, denied.
Okay. Well, can we pull up why they were denied?
That's
Like
what the
like
whistleblowers are trying to.
like the judge should have given a reason for the reason that that was never going to make it to trial.
It wasn't the judge. It
Was
was
it the prosecutor?
it was the prosecutor. So the IRS was saying we wanted to have these brought, and then I don't like maybe it was David Weiss didn't want them to do it, but
Mhm.
either way, you had easily fileable charges that were just shut down. No, we're not going to allow this. And the whistleblowers are saying it's because Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice are saying no, we're not like we don't want this to happen.
So
And
the Department of Justice and Merrick Garland have nothing to do with state and local charges, or at least they shouldn't.
they
Like,
shouldn't, and more than anything, they shouldn't be able to tell the special investigator that this is what you are and are not allowed to do. That's the
right.
entire point of a special investigator is they
Well,
don't have
actually,
anybody telling them that.
the special investigator is kind of constrained by uh, what do you call it? It's not Congress. They're constrained by their mandate. So if the mandate says you can look into anything and everything related to Hunter Biden, that's a really broad mandate, right? But that's not what that mandate says. If you actually go read that, he's probably barred from it because this mandate constricted him to where he couldn't look in to David Weiss.
Okay, but the IRS employees are looking into that. Like they found tax evasion in California for him paying prostitutes, and
Okay.
they're saying this amounts to a felony charge.
If it's federal tax evasion, then they should charge. If it's state and local level, then the state should charge, right? But if the state says we don't have enough to charge here, then you got nothing. Like,
And what if instead of that, the the person that's requesting all of this stuff is just told you're not allowed to request that. So you want this evidence, you want this proof,
if it's
and
if
if you
it's
have the proof, go after them, but you're
if
not allowed
it
to collect that
if it
proof.
fell under his mandate, if it says, hey, you can look into Hunter Biden and the David Wise relationship all you want, and he was barred from doing that, then yeah, that needs to be looked into and prosecuted to the full extent. Like, I don't disagree that, but I have a feeling what it comes down to is his mandate restricted him from looking into the David Wise stuff. And it's probably purposely constricted that way. Let's like I'm not making apologies for it. It's probably when they wrote the mandate, it probably purposely carved that out because they knew something was there. But it's not the same thing as like, oh, I was barred from seeing it. Yeah, I mean, your mandate basically said you couldn't look into it. Is that someone making a phone call and saying don't talk to the special, prosecutor? No. That is, the mandate was written and was signed by both the attorney general and the special prosecutor. These were the guidelines they agreed to.
So that's what I was just about to ask. Who writes that mandate? Who gets to say what's in there and what's in the purview or scope?
It's supposed to be the attorney general.
Okay,
Now,
and who appointed this attorney general? And
again, you're making a leap that like, oh, Joe Biden sat down with the attorney general and purposely carved this out, right? And the
I
thing
don't think he
is
has to. I don't think he has to sit down with him. I think he
Mhm.
just like Merrick Garland knows what's best for Joe Biden, and what's best for
Okay,
Joe Biden is going to be best for Merrick Garland because they're on the same team. They're in that same
okay.
clan.
I mean, I can say the same thing about Donald Trump's attorney general, who's now like spoken out against him publicly. Uh, I mean, he was on the same side then and protected him then. That's what your attorney general is supposed to do. So,
I
I
would say
mean,
the
again,
attorney general's not the president's guy. He's not the president's lawyer.
he's not supposed to be, but for the last 2 decades, that's what we've gotten, right? I think since Bill Clinton, the attorney general has been the president's lawyer. like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Who was it?
I-
Janet Reno?
yeah, let's be honest. The attorney general is the president's top lawyer. Like,
Yeah, but so the thing is, so number one, I kept forgetting to say that you keep saying I'm making leaps and like you're
Mhm,
making it sound like I'm connecting these dots that are, solar systems apart.
mhm.
And no, I feel like it's stepping stones. Like, yes,
Well,
it is making a step, but
well,
there is a connection there.
it's the same thing. Like, oh, Trump has business dealings in Russia, so the Trump Russia thing is a thing, right? But it's like, no, we were making these small leaps that seemed to be legitimate, but they were not legitimate at all, right? Like in a investigation, especially like a federal investigation, in order to prove things, you can't have these leap. You have to show the line from point A to point B every step of the way. Because if you can't do that, nothing's going to happen. And
That's fine, but
that's the thing that has protected politicians forever.
that's the basis of those investigations
Mhm.
is you got to have, well, this looks like a leap, let's see if we can try to connect the dots in between.
Right.
So the Trump Russia investigation, I thought it was way drawn out and went on, like we spent way too much money on it, but I
Right.
think there was some smoke there. Let's see if there's a fire.
Right. And the thing is I had no I wasn't against the investigation in itself, but to hear my colleagues, people that I talk to on the left all the time, just be like, "Oh, well, it's this big bad thing." I was like, "You can't prove any of that. The idea, it can't just be what you think happened or what. Well, this makes sense to me. It's got to be what can you prove." So it. I mean, to this day, I have people that'll be like, "Oh, Trump was in bed with Russia." I'm like, well, "You couldn't prove any of that after years of investigation. You could prove none of it." So I mean, you can think that all day long, but in a courtroom, it's all about what you can prove versus what you can't. I don't think they had enough on Hunter to get him on any more than he pled to, because if they could, why offer him that plea deal at all? And it's the special prosecutor's purview on whether or not what to charge him with. So, I mean, are you now going to say like, oh, the special prosecutor wanted to get him with more, but then offered him this cushy plea deal instead?
That's basically what I'm speculating. So I don't
Right.
know, and that's what I want to see. What these whistleblowers, I want to see the fruit of
Dude,
these
I
investigation
want to
fruits.
hear from them. If they can prove tax evasion beyond a reasonable doubt, then yeah, Hunter Biden should be charged federally again. The thing is I don't think they have that, which is why they're just speaking out to the media, going, "Oh, like we think we have him on this." It's like, well, you can't think you have somebody. You have to have somebody, right? You have to have all the evidence in front of you that show point A to point B. Hunter Biden evaded taxes yet again.
So you talk about these guys speaking out to the media.
Mhm.
One, I don't think either one of them has, but only one of them we know his name. The other one's staying anonymous.
Mhm.
So I don't think it's about any media tour. I don't think he's trying to write a book that's going to be
So
selling.
so he just went to House Republicans. So
Uh,
these guys just what gave the information to House Republicans and
I
that's it.
I think they followed the appropriate steps, the appropriate protocols that are in place for whistleblower investigations.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a Like
So,
whenever there's a whistleblower, I try to ask myself like, what's in it for them? Like it's that cui bono, who profits?
well, I
And
also,
if
yeah.
it's the whistleblower, then okay, I'm going to take a grain of salt. Like who I don't remember the lady's name that was saying Trump raped her.
Mhm.
Like that's one that like, oh, okay, she's writing a book and now that's coming out, and okay,
Right.
so there's some benefit here. But these whistleblowers, they're basically throwing their careers away. Like one of them's already the guy that already said he got denied a promotion, and who knows what his record actually looked like before that? Was he actually on track for this promotion or not?
Right.
But
Well,
it's
that's the thing.
still a thread to pull on.
Well, that's the thing is I agree we should probably pull on it. Like you're not going to hear me say, "Oh, we shouldn't look into that because X, Y, or Z." No, if it looks fishy, we should look into it. We do the same thing at the company we work at, right? Like if something seems a little fishy, we pull everything back to take a look at it. Same thing should be done here. But what I am saying is like, look, if these people were being completely honest and they went through the chain like you said they did and blew the whistle on some wrongdoing here, right? Then yes, the Attorney General and the Department of Justice need to look into that. But what I am saying is if the Department of Justice and the Attorney General take a look at it and go, you've got circumstantial evidence at best, you have to accept that. Like,
I would want an independent. So I would
okay.
accept it if we could get a truly
So you
independent,
want
somebody
a
that.
special prosecutor number two. like,
So I will accept. So it's more about these whistleblowers saying that this special prosecutor was compromised.
okay.
So if that comes out that no, he was acting under the authority or the recommendations directly from Merrick Garland, then yeah, we kind of got to throw the special prosecutor out.
Well, I mean, and it could be something like, oh, the special prosecutor reached out to Merrick Garland and said, hey, like I'm pulling on threads here. My mandate restricts me from interviewing this person. I would like to extend my mandate so that I can get this. And Merrick Garland said, no, I want to know that too. Because if it looks like Merrick Garland is intentionally interfering with the investigation, then yeah, I want to know that. I don't think it's going to be something malicious like that. I think it's going to be the special prosecutor read his mandate and said, I don't have the authority to look into this. We're going to move on. And I mean, you have to kind of accept that too. It's like I was restrained by my mandate. I couldn't go look into everything because the last time we had someone with a blanket mandate, that's how Bill Clinton and Monica came up. They were looking into something completely different, but because the mandate was so broad, we found out about Monica, right? Like it's Democrats are not going to make that mistake again. Republicans definitely aren't going to make that mistake because, I mean, when we did the special prosecutor for Donald Trump, couldn't look into his taxes, couldn't look into his business finances, couldn't you had to stay in your lane, right? It's the same tactic deployed by both sides. I don't think I don't think Hunter Biden's a good guy. I don't think Joe Biden's a good guy. But at the end of the day, it's about what you can prove. And I mean, you've got Hunter Biden dead to rights on tax evasion and a gun charge right now. That's it. And he pled guilty to both of those. Yay. Like the president's son is a felon. That's what you got out of it.
That wasn't what people were after. I kept waiting for like a and finally we agree.
Right.
But once you're saying that that's all you got on Hunter Biden, like wait for that other shoe to drop.
Okay. And the thing is like we can agree on that yes, the Hunter Biden story isn't over. And I think that there are things that even I'm curious about that I would like to look into. Because if the president is compromised, regardless of what party that they're in, if Hunter Biden is compromised and Joe Biden is compromised because of his son, we, the American people, deserve to know that, right? Especially going into the next election cycle. I just don't think you got enough to prove it. And I don't think you have enough to sway Democrats off that position. So, as much my tip for Republicans going into the next election season is this is nothing so far, unless you have what you say you have on the in the halls of Congress, you got nothing. Move on.
I think finally we do agree.
Right.